Racist cop humiliates. Black woman during traffic. Stop unaware. She's a high-ranking government official. A stiff breeze rattled the crisp morning air as a sleek black sedan cruised down the deserted highway. Inside sat a poised and self-assured black woman named Michaela Johnson, heading home after a late-night policy meeting in Washington, D.C. She was running on coffee and determination, unaware that her journey was about to be derailed by a single flashing blue light. Little did anyone know this was no ordinary traffic stop, and she was no ordinary motorist. In mere moments, a shocking confrontation with a bigoted local cop would set in motion a chain of events that would echo far beyond this dusty stretch of road. Michaela Johnson was no stranger to long drives. As an undersecretary at the U.S. Department of Justice, a detail she kept quiet outside official circles, her responsibilities often took her beyond the marble corridors of Washington, D.C., and into real communities across the country. On this particular night, her day had begun with a heated meeting concerning a sensitive civil rights investigation in the outskirts of Baltimore. By the time she got on the road, it was well past midnight. With the rush of official motorcades now gone, she enjoyed the empty silence of the highway. The hum of the engine provided a soothing backdrop to her scattered thoughts. Her mind drifted over the day's challenges, a complex legal framework, uneasy negotiations with local law enforcement, and the persistent undertones of racial tension. She had grown up in a neighborhood where cops were rarely friendly, and she had dedicated her life to bridging the distrust that simmered between law enforcement and communities of color. Through her decades of hard work and an unbreakable spirit, she had climbed the ranks to become a high-ranking official responsible for ensuring constitutional protections for all Americans. But the higher she rose, the more she realized how deep prejudice could run. Tonight, though, the only immediate concern seemed to be her exhaustion and the quiet gloom of the deserted highway. Her eyelids felt heavy. The mesmerizing dashed lines on the road lulled her into a reflective trance. Every so often, she would reach for her travel mug to sip on the remaining cold coffee, hoping the caffeine would keep her alert. The stars overhead were a brilliant tapestry in the unpolluted country sky, a stark contrast to the luminous swirl that hovered over Washington. Just as she felt herself relaxing into the drive, headlights appeared in her rearview mirror, rapidly getting closer. At first, she assumed it might be a trucker eager to pass by, but the silhouette quickly revealed itself to be a police cruiser. The bright headlights stayed close, inching nearer, until the dreaded flicker of red and blue lights filled her car. She let out a resigned sigh. Michaela pulled over onto the shoulder of the road, careful to signal. She felt that old twinge of tension in her stomach, a reflex from her childhood, the same one that every person of color might feel in a similar situation. She thought to herself, stay calm, follow procedure. Even as an undersecretary of the Department of Justice, she never took a police encounter for granted. She had seen too many injustices to assume she would be treated fairly, especially late at night on a desolate stretch of highway where no one was around to witness. Her heart pounded as she rolled down the window and heard the gravel crunch beneath the officer's boots. Whatever was about to happen, she knew one thing: she was not going to cower. She would handle it with the grace and dignity she had always carried within herself. But as the cop's flashlight stabbed into the car's interior, illuminating her face, Michaela recognized the unmistakable flicker of hostility in the man's eyes. She had no idea how deeply this moment would unravel, nor how profoundly it would echo through the corridors of power. Once her identity came to light, Officer Darren Tully had worked for the Montgomery County Police Department for the better part of a decade. His precinct was small, and the roads he patrolled late at night were usually uneventful. That suited him just fine. He liked the sense of authority the uniform gave him. Standing at 6 feet tall with a broad, barrel-chested frame, Tully thrived on the feeling of control he got from even the smallest interactions, especially traffic stops on dark roads. Over the years, Tully's personal views had become an open secret among the other officers. Though he tried to keep up appearances when higher-ups visited, there was no disguising the sneer he reserved for certain communities. Multiple complaints had been filed against him, stories of mocking remarks, unnecessary searches, and combative behavior, but each time he managed to dodge serious consequences. Either his superiors would brush it aside as lack of evidence, or Tully's well-placed friends in the local union would shield him. No external investigator had ever pried too deep. This particular night, Tully felt even more on edge than usual. A recent departmental audit had put everyone in the station on high alert. Whispers about racism and biased policing circulated through the halls. Tully resented the entire conversation. In his mind, he was just doing his job. If he happened to pay extra attention to certain types of people, well, that was just good policing. Or so he told himself. So when he saw a black sedan with out-of-state plates gliding down his quiet highway, he decided to initiate a stop, claiming the vehicle was speeding, though in truth, it wasn't going much over the limit. He noted it was a black driver. Perfect scenario, he thought. He could do his routine check and let them know who was in charge out here. As he approached Michaela's car, he could see from her refined posture that she was different from the usual drivers he hassled. Something about her composed, attentive gaze unsettled him. Instead of fear or confusion, she seemed prepared. He shone his flashlight directly at her face, leaning in closer than he needed to. He found a certain twisted pleasure in making people squint at the sudden brightness, in asserting dominance before a word was even spoken. She didn't flinch, though. Tully's grip on the flashlight tightened. The next few minutes would alter the course of his life in ways he could never have imagined. For now, he was too blinded by arrogance to see the writing on the wall. Michaela forced a polite smile as the beam of the flashlight lingered on her eyes, bouncing off her car's interior. "Good evening, officer," she said calmly, arms resting on the steering wheel. "Is there a problem?" Tully's upper lip curled. "License and registration," he barked, ignoring her question. He still kept the flashlight pointed at her face. Now, years of training in legal protocol kicked in. Michaela moved with deliberate caution, signaling each motion to avoid any claim of reaching or threatening. She popped open the glove compartment, retrieved her registration, and then pulled her wallet from her purse. Her driver's license read, Michaela D. Johnson, Washington, D.C. She handed both documents to Tully with an air of calmness that seemed to aggravate him. "Where are you coming from at this hour?" Tully demanded, flipping the license between his fingers. He noted her name but didn't connect it with anything notable. "I had business in Baltimore," she explained. "I'm on my way back home to D.C. Is there a particular reason you pulled me over, officer?" Tully snorted. "You were speeding." Michaela checked the speedometer in her mind. She knew she had been going maybe 3 or 4 miles over the limit. Not exactly a usual cause for this level of interrogation. But she kept her composure. She had dealt with hostility before, and she reminded herself, do not escalate. "Am I free to go with a warning?" she asked evenly, aware that the answer would likely be no. She extended a measure of courtesy that, in her heart, she knew Tully did not deserve. "I apologize if I was over the limit." "Step out of the vehicle," Tully responded abruptly. Michaela's eyes flickered. "Pardon me?" "I said get out," Tully repeated, this time leaning in, his breath fogging the night air. She hesitated. Legally, an officer can ask a driver to exit, but typically it requires some articulable suspicion. She weighed her next move, comply first, then clarify her rights. Her position within the Department of Justice often gave her the advantage of legal knowledge, but it also made her painfully aware of how quickly a situation can turn dangerous, especially when prejudice is involved. She turned off the ignition and unbuckled her seatbelt. With careful movements, Michaela opened the door and stepped out, the chill of the night biting at her ankles. The emptiness of the roadside only amplified the tension. Tully motioned for her to step onto the gravel shoulder behind her car. She complied, ensuring her hands remained visible. "Hands behind your back," Tully snapped. "Excuse me?" Michaela replied, tension rising in her voice. "Am I being detained, officer? On what grounds?" Tully responded by pulling out a pair of handcuffs. A small smirk danced across his lips, as if he relished the moment. Suspicion of reckless driving. "Now do as I say." Fury and disbelief collided inside Michaela, but she stifled an outward reaction. She had to follow protocol. Do not resist. Stay calm. Record everything mentally. She felt the cold steel clamp around her wrists, a humiliating weight that ignited memories of countless civil rights cases. She silently cursed the cruelty of a system that emboldened officers like Tully. She thought, "He has no idea who I am or what I can do." As Michaela stood there, wrists bound, a fleeting memory washed over her. She was just 10 years old, growing up in a modest neighborhood in southeast DC. The day her older cousin was handcuffed and shoved against a squad car for loitering never left her mind. They had been walking back from a corner store when police swarmed them, guns drawn, screaming accusations. She remembered the confusion, the terror on her cousin's face, and the sense of powerlessness that engulfed them. It was in that moment, as a child, that she first understood how authority could be misused, how prejudice could warp justice. That memory had propelled her into law school, fueled her desire to join the Department of Justice, and shaped her sense of mission to protect constitutional rights, to hold bad actors accountable, and to champion the most vulnerable. Now it felt as if life had come full circle. Here she was again, standing by a police cruiser, detained for a baseless reason. In many ways, it was a surreal echo of the past. But this time she was no powerless child. She was an undersecretary with the capacity to launch formal investigations, a woman with direct channels to federal oversight agencies. She inhaled the crisp air, forcing her pulse to slow. She made a mental note of every detail: Tully's name tag, his badge number, the patrol car's license plate. She would not let this pass unanswered. Officer Tully maneuvered her to the front of his cruiser, pressing her shoulders down. "Let's see if you're carrying anything you shouldn't," he muttered, patting her down roughly. Michaela flinched at the invasive touch but didn't speak, saving her words for a moment when they would have maximum impact. She had the presence of mind to realize Tully was fishing for contraband or any reason to escalate the encounter further. Finding nothing, Tully stepped back. "Don't move," he said, as if she had any choice with cuffs on. He walked around to her car, rummaging inside without permission. Michaela's stomach churned. This was an illegal search. No probable cause or consent had been provided. She considered invoking her rights out loud, but she sensed Tully was just waiting for an excuse to claim she was resisting. Seconds turned into minutes as Tully continued to rifle through her belongings. The humiliating spectacle felt endless, a harsh reminder that for all the laws in place, those with biased dispositions could still violate someone's rights on a lonely stretch of highway. She cast her gaze down at the dusty gravel underfoot, every second intensifying her resolve. When Tully finally returned, his face was twisted with disappointment, as though annoyed he hadn't discovered anything incriminating. He placed one firm hand on her arm and led her back toward her car. "You want to tell me what you're really doing out here this time of night?" he demanded. "No one in their right mind drives through these parts if they can avoid it." "I've told you," Michaela replied, keeping her voice steady. "I'm returning from a meeting in Baltimore, that's all." Tully let out a derisive laugh. "Sure, I'll verify your story once we get to the station." A flicker of alarm shot through Michaela. This was precisely the kind of scenario that too often led to tragic outcomes. She knew she must remain calm but not passive. For the first time, she allowed a hint of authority to seep into her tone. "I'm asking you politely, Officer Tully," she said, her eyes locking onto his, "to explain the probable cause for this search and my detention." He leaned in, practically nose to nose. "Listen here, lady. I'm the one asking the questions." "Got it." His raw hostility rattled through the night. Michaela's heart pounded, but she reminded herself, "I will not be broken." Deep in her core, she believed in the rule of law, that justice would prevail. She said nothing further, reserving her energy for what she suspected would be a far longer battle. The ride to the station was tense, filled with Tully's clipped commands and the metallic clank of handcuffs. No matter how often Michaela tried to shift for comfort, the cuffs dug into her wrists. After a 15-minute drive, they pulled into a squat brick building near the edge of a small-town Montgomery County's more rural precinct office, far from the bustle of city life. The worn sign read Montgomery County Police Department, District 6 in chipped paint. A handful of patrol cars were parked out front, their headlights reflecting off puddles formed by recent drizzle. Tully escorted Michaela inside, guiding her past a sleepy receptionist who barely looked up from a newspaper. Down a dim corridor, they reached a small holding room with a wooden desk and scuffed chairs. Tully pressed a form into Michaela's hand. "Fill this out," he ordered, unlocking her cuffs. "I'll be back in a minute." Michaela glanced at the form, a standard intake form that all detainees were required to complete. She noticed the dais next to the desk had a single camera pointed at the seat, likely for record-keeping, though whether it actually captured the entire room was questionable. The musty smell of stale coffee and disinfectant weighed heavily in the confined space. With her wrists freed, she took a moment to rub the red marks left by the cuffs. She was furious, but reminded herself to remain in control. The form asked for personal details: name, address, occupation. Under occupation, she wrote, "attorney." She hesitated to reveal her complete government title just yet. If Tully and his associates had stooped to this level of harassment without reason, she wanted to see how much further they would go before she played her ultimate card. A wave of exhaustion washed over her, yet adrenaline kept her focused. She recognized that every minute spent in that holding room increased the risk of Tully or someone else stepping beyond the bounds of the law. She'd read countless case files of individuals whose routine stops escalated into dire situations. She couldn't afford to be complacent. When Tully returned, he snatched the form from her. He studied it, eyes narrowing when he read that she was an attorney. He let out a derisive snort. "Oh, you're a lawyer. That's rich." He spat the words as though the profession was inherently disreputable. "Next, you'll tell me you work for the government, right?" "Something like that," Michaela said, a quiet edge lacing her tone. Tully slammed the form down on the desk. "We're going to hold you overnight until we verify your identity. Then we'll see if you've got any outstanding warrants." Michaela's heart hammered, but she kept her voice measured. "That won't be necessary. If you run a simple background check on my license, you'll see it's valid, officer." "I'm not a flight risk," Tully scoffed. "That's for me to decide. In the meantime, you'll stay put. We follow procedure around here." With that, Tully signaled to another officer, a younger man with weary eyes and a name tag reading B. Harris. Officer Harris approached, a worried expression crossing his face. He was evidently uneasy about the situation, but Tully's overbearing presence cast a long shadow. "Take her to holding room 3, Tully instructed. "Make sure you log everything." Harris nodded, motioning politely for Michaela to follow him. As she passed Tully, she looked directly at him, her eyes flickering with both ire and composure. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she thought, but kept the words to herself. If Tully insisted on continuing down this path, he would soon find out the truth in a far more humiliating fashion. Officer Harris led Michaela down another corridor. Unlike Tully, his posture seemed less rigid, his tone less abrasive. He opened the door to a narrow holding cell. Stark white walls, a single bench, and a fluorescent light that buzzed overhead set the scene. Michaela stepped in, and Harris closed the door behind them, though he didn't lock it right away. "Ma'am," he began softly, almost apologetically, "I'm sorry about all this. Protocol says we—" "Do you always follow Tully's every order?" Michaela asked, more curious than accusatory. She studied his face, noticing the faint flush in his cheeks. Harris swallowed hard, shifting from foot to foot. "I'm new here," he admitted. "I transferred from a different district about a month ago. Officer Tully, he has seniority. I'm supposed to, follow the chain of command." It was clear he felt uncomfortable. Michaela nodded, understanding all too well the pressure that came with hierarchical structures. "I get it," she said, letting some warmth slip into her tone. "But I want to be clear. There has been no real offense here. I was pulled over for a minor speed violation, which I don't even think was accurately clocked. Then I was handcuffed and brought in under vague pretenses. This is highly irregular." Harris fiddled with a clipboard he carried. I know. Look, if you want to make a phone call, I can let you do that. But I can't overrule Tully, not directly. If I do, he'll make my life miserable." He glanced at her, sincerity shining in his eyes. Michaela weighed her options. Calling someone at the Department of Justice might set off a political firestorm. It might be more effective to see how far Tully would push this scenario. On the other hand, she didn't want to spend the entire night locked up in a Spartan cell. She reached a middle ground. "I'd appreciate a phone call, thank you, but not just yet." "Give me a few minutes, please." Harris nodded. "I'll be at the desk down the hall if you need anything. We don't exactly have female staff on the night shift here, so if you need—" He trailed off, flushing again. "It's fine," Michaela said gently. "Thank you, Officer Harris." He left, the cell door swinging shut behind him, though Michaela noted he hadn't locked it. She sat down on the bench, letting out a long, slow breath. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Tully's intimidation tactics were predictable. Isolate, demean, rattle the detainee until they either incriminate themselves or become too fearful to fight back. But that wasn't going to work on her. She would wait, gather evidence, and watch Tully condemn himself with his own actions. For a moment, she allowed herself a small smile. Ironically, Tully's arrogance might be his downfall. He seemed too entrenched in his prejudice to suspect that this black woman, with an attitude as he might label her, could be a key government figure in charge of overseeing precisely the kind of misconduct he was exhibiting. And so she settled in, each minute strengthening her determination to see justice done, no matter how personal it had become. Back at the front desk, Tully was poring over Michaela's license, tapping away at a computer terminal. The screen displayed standard DMV details. License valid, no prior convictions, no outstanding warrants. Everything was clean, his brow furrowed. He'd hoped to uncover something, anything that could justify his rough handling of the situation. As Tully clicked through government databases, a small note popped up indicating that Michaela Johnson was a government employee, specifically with the Department of Justice. It was a bare-bones reference, lacking details about her role. Still, it was enough to send a jolt of unease through Tully. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Department of Justice," he murmured to himself, his tone wary. He glanced around the station to ensure no one was watching too closely. The idea that he might have just manhandled a federal official, albeit a lesser one, unsettled him. "No wonder she's acting so cocky," he muttered. "Probably some desk jockey." In his ignorance, He assumed government employee meant she was a run-of-the-mill bureaucrat, not a high-ranking official who could open an internal investigation into his conduct. The door creaked open, and Officer Harris stepped in. Tully quickly closed the screen and turned to face him. "Harris," he growled, "what are you doing here? You're supposed to be watching the detainee." Harris sighed. "She's in the cell, locked up. I need your signature on these intake documents. Standard procedure." Tully grabbed the papers, scribbling his name at the bottom without reading them. "Any trouble from her yet?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. Harris shook his head. "She's surprisingly calm." "Too calm," Tully sneered. "You watch her. The second she starts anything, call me." Harris nodded but paused. He could feel the tension in the room. A sense of guilt nagged at him. The entire situation reeked of abuse of power. He had heard rumors about Tully's track record, but had hoped they were exaggerated. Now he was seeing it firsthand. "What's her background check say?" Harris asked, half curious, half concerned. "Just some government employee from DC," Tully lied, downplaying the significance. "Nothing that changes anything. She's still going to remain here until morning, at least." With that, Tully waved Harris away, returning to his computer. "Government employee or not," Tully told himself, "I'm not letting her walk out of here unscathed." Yet a seed of worry had taken root in his mind. He would have to tread carefully. If she was a federal employee, she might actually know her rights well enough to file a formal complaint that would actually stick. Officers milled around the station, the fluorescent lights reflecting off their badges. Outside, the midnight sky was giving way to a faint shimmer of early dawn. Tully's shift was nearing its end, but he wasn't about to let go of this case. Not yet. In the back of his mind, something told him he might have just kicked a hornet's nest. But his pride refused to let him back down. The hours dragged on, the dim corridors of the station accentuated by the flicker of overhead bulbs. Finally, an orange tinge on the horizon signaled the coming dawn. In the holding cell, Michaela felt the weight of fatigue settling in, yet her resolve remained steadfast. She asked Officer Harris to allow her one phone call. He escorted her to a small, stuffy office that doubled as a storage room. A single landline phone rested on a cluttered table. Harris lingered by the door, giving Michaela a measure of privacy, while still fulfilling his duty to keep watch. Michaela dialed a number from memory, the direct line of her trusted assistant in DC, Angela Price. After 3 rings, a sleepy yet concerned voice answered. "Angela here." "It's me," Michaela said, her voice low. "I'm currently at the Montgomery County Police Department. Got detained during a traffic stop." She spoke carefully, aware Harris was within earshot. "Detained?" Angela echoed, alarm sharpening her tone. "That doesn't make sense. Why?" Michaela cut in gently. "Long story. I need you to contact a friend of mine at the district attorney's office, Richard Moreno. Also, let the Deputy Attorney General's team know I might require some backup. But no major sirens yet, okay? I want to handle this quietly if possible." "Understood," Angela replied, the gears of an experienced aide already turning. "Are you safe?" "For now, yes. I'm in a holding cell, but I'm not harmed. I'd like to keep it that way, so let's move carefully." They exchanged a few more words before Michaela hung up. Although outwardly calm, a wave of relief washed over her. She had initiated the cavalry without unleashing the full might of the department. If Tully continued his actions, she'd have no choice but to escalate. But she wanted to give the system one last chance to do the right thing. She hoped cooler heads might prevail. Harris escorted her back to the cell. He seemed troubled, though he said nothing. As he closed the door behind her, the echo of the latch reverberated in Michaela's chest. She sat down, leaning against the wall. Despite her exhaustion, she began mentally drafting the official complaint she would file: dates, times, specific actions. She wanted to ensure every detail was accurate. Meanwhile, in the front desk area, Tully downed another cup of bitter station coffee. The dark circles under his eyes hinted at his fatigue, but he refused to show weakness. Occasionally, he glanced at the clock on the wall. If no major red flags arose soon, he would try to hold Michaela until at least mid-morning, maybe even until after lunch. He relished the idea of letting her sweat in a cramped cell. A thin part of him worried about her government connection, but the rest of him, buoyed by arrogance, dismissed it as unimportant. Yet Tully failed to realize that the gears of justice were already turning outside his jurisdiction. Word was traveling through official channels, and phone calls were being made. The next few hours would bring something he never saw coming: federal agents who took allegations of civil rights violations extremely seriously. By 7 in the morning, the station's day shift started trickling in, greeting each other with yawns and half-hearted nods. Officer Tully, resisting the urge to clock out, lingered near the front desk. He refused to relinquish control over Michaela's case. A middle-aged sergeant named Linda Park arrived, setting her coffee down on the worn counter. She had been with the department for nearly 2 decades and took note of Tully's presence. Typically, he'd be heading home by now. She raised an eyebrow. "You're still here?" Tully shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "Got a detainee I need to process." Sergeant Park frowned. "Over a traffic stop?" "Seriously, Tully?" He bristled under her scrutiny. "She's a suspicious character. I ran her ID. She's some government type out of DC. Could be lying about who she really is." Park gave him a pointed look. "Show me the paperwork." She reached out, her tone revealing her skepticism. Tully handed over the sparse report he'd typed up. Park scanned it, her lips pursing tighter. "This is it?" she asked, unimpressed. "No contraband found, no outstanding warrants, no prior offences, no sign of intoxication. Exactly what's suspicious here?" Tully straightened. She was uncooperative, showed signs of agitation. Park rolled her eyes. "You do realize that agitation isn't a crime, right? Or maybe she was just tired and upset about being pulled over." Before Tully could retort, the front door swung open. In walked 2 individuals in business attire, looking distinctly out of place amidst the standard uniforms. One was a tall black man in a crisp suit, the other a white woman with a short haircut and an air of authority. Both flashed credentials as soon as they approached the desk. "Good morning," the man said, voice firm. "I'm Richard Moreno from the District Attorney's Office. This is Special Agent Lydia Song from the Department of Justice's Office of the Inspector General. We're here to see a detainee, Michaela Johnson." Tully's eyes widened imperceptibly. He glanced at Park, who crossed her arms. "Right this way," she said, gesturing toward the corridor. Tully watched them disappear down the hallway, his stomach twisted in knots. He sensed the situation spiraling out of his control. How did they get here so fast? In the holding cell, Michaela felt her heart leap when she saw Richard Moreno step through the door. He was a longtime friend and ally, well versed in federal civil rights cases. Behind him stood Special Agent Song, one of the Inspector General's sharpest investigators. Michaela rose, a quiet surge of validation coursing through her. "Richard, Lydia," she greeted, inclining her head. "Thank you for coming." Moreno nodded grimly. "We got your message. Are you all right?" Michaela offered a tight smile. "I'm fine, just tired and angry." Agent Song stepped forward. "MAAM, can you confirm your full position for the record?" Her voice was formal, but Michaela detected the respectful undertone. Michaela spoke clearly. "I am Michaela D. Johnson, Under Secretary in the Civil Rights Division at the Point US Department of Justice." The words felt liberating, as though shedding an unwanted disguise. Harris, who had been standing guard, nearly dropped his clipboard. He had suspected she was someone important, but Under Secretary was far beyond what he'd imagined. He felt a pang of dread, realizing what Tully's actions might mean. Richard Moreno nodded. "We're here to facilitate your immediate release and to determine if there's cause to file a formal complaint or possibly criminal charges against the officers involved. Would you like to step out now?" Michaela exhaled the tension she'd been holding. "Yes, I'd appreciate that." With a swift motion, Harris unlocked the cell door. Michaela emerged, standing tall, her gaze resolute. They walked back to the main lobby, where Tully and Sergeant Park stood. The moment Tully locked eyes with Michaela, the color drained from his face. Agent Song addressed Tully, brandishing her ID again. "Officer Tully, I'd like to speak with you in private regarding the events of last night. We have reason to believe this traffic stop was conducted in a manner that may violate federal civil rights statutes, as well as departmental policy." Tully's jaw clenched. "I was just doing my job," he insisted, voice clipped. Michaela regarded him, her expression a mix of frustration and resolve. "Then you'll have no trouble explaining your actions to the Office of the Inspector General," she said quietly. Beside them, Sergeant Park stepped in, her voice firm but even. "Officer Tully, consider yourself on administrative leave pending this investigation. Hand over your badge and firearm." A stunned hush fell over the station. Tully's eyes flashed with anger, but he had nowhere to run. Slowly he reached up to unclip his badge and holster. Moreno escorted Michaela outside. The morning sun felt warm against her skin after the cramped chill of the holding cell. She allowed herself one moment of relief, inhaling the fresh air, but she knew this was just the beginning. The internal process would be lengthy, filled with depositions, statements, and evidence gathering. Tully's day of reckoning had arrived, and perhaps it would also serve as a wake-up call for the entire department. Later that day, Michaela sat in a well-lit conference room in a nearby federal building. Spread out in front of her were various forms, official complaints, affidavits, and transcripts of phone calls. Agent Song and Richard Moreno were present, as was Michaela's personal counsel, a former district judge named Carmen Lewis. They systematically documented every detail of Michaela's experience: the initial stop, Tully's demeanor, the search of her vehicle, the baseless detention, and the humiliating overnight confinement. Officer Harris had already provided a preliminary statement corroborating much of Michaela's account, including the complete absence of any real probable cause. Carmen Lewis took off her reading glasses. "We have more than enough evidence to proceed with a federal inquiry into civil rights violations. Whether we push for Tully's prosecution is a separate matter. That's the department's call." Michaela nodded, her voice thoughtful. "I want to see Tully held accountable, but I also want to expose any broader systemic issues in that precinct. If he's done this to me, an undersecretary, imagine what he's done to people without resources or connections." Richard Moreno leaned forward. "Agreed. We've flagged his name before in minor complaints that never went anywhere. Now that you're willing to stand as a key witness, we can reopen those cases. This might uncover a pattern of abuse." A solemn hush filled the room. Michaela felt a swirl of emotions, anger at the system that had allowed this type of discrimination to fester, gratitude for the chance to challenge it, and a fierce determination to ensure real change occurred. Agent Song's phone buzzed, and she excused herself to take a call. After a moment she returned, a half-smile on her face. That was the Inspector General himself. "He's giving us the green light to proceed with a full investigation. Tully and possibly other officers at that precinct will be interviewed extensively." Michaela felt a wave of relief. "Thank you, Lydia. This is exactly what needs to happen." A sense of purpose filled the air, overshadowing the lingering bitterness from the night before. Michaela resolved to remain as visible as possible during the process, to serve not just as a complainant, but as a catalyst for broader reform. In her mind, Tully had become the face of a systemic problem, one she had spent her entire career trying to uproot. Little did anyone know, the fallout for Tully and for the precinct would be far more dramatic than they could anticipate. The seeds of accountability were planted, and they were about to bear consequences. News travelled swiftly. By the following day, local headlines blared with variations of high-ranking DOJ official wrongfully detained by Montgomery cop and racist policing allegations spark federal probe. For the first time in his career, Officer Tully found himself in the glaring spotlight of public scrutiny he had always managed to avoid. At home, Tully fumed. Suspended from duty, stripped of his badge, he paced the small living room, occasionally glancing at his phone. Friends and family called, some offering support, others demanding explanations. Some members of the community called him a hero for standing up to bureaucrats, while others labeled him a menace who needed to be removed from the force. The online world dissected every rumor. Tully's face appeared on social media, accompanied by outraged comments and memes depicting him as a symbol of racist policing. In stark contrast, Michaela received an outpouring of support from colleagues and strangers alike. Former classmates messaged her, praising her courage. Grassroots civil rights organizations lauded her actions as an example of how to fight discriminatory policing head-on. Flowers arrived at her office, and well-wishers left voicemails encouraging her to see this through. Yet for Michaela, the personal ramifications were not all positive. Her phone buzzed incessantly with media requests, some from tabloids seeking sensationalized scoops. She declined these interviews for now, preferring to keep the focus on the official investigation rather than fueling public drama. More concerningly, hate mail and anonymous threats also found their way to her inbox. She forwarded each threatening message to security, aware that her position offered some level of protection, but also that extremist rhetoric was no small matter. Despite the turmoil, Michaela pressed on. She gave an internal briefing to senior officials at the Department of Justice, including the Attorney General. They pledged their full backing. "We cannot allow rogue officers to taint the institution of policing," the AG stated firmly. "People must know we will defend their civil rights, no matter who they are." Behind the scenes, her legal team continued building a case against Tully. They pored over old complaint files, interviewed witnesses who had lodged grievances in the past, and documented patterns of misconduct. Each new piece of evidence further solidified the argument that Tully not only violated department protocol, but systematically targeted minority drivers. The community, too, began to speak out. Town hall meetings saw local residents sharing their harrowing encounters with Tully. Many were frightened to come forward, still skeptical that a system that had failed them before would finally listen. Michaela, in conjunction with civil rights attorneys, offered them guidance and reassurance. All of this weighed heavily on Michaela's shoulders. Still, she found strength in the knowledge that her ordeal was catalyzing real progress. The cracks in the foundation were being exposed, and maybe, just maybe, this time they would be repaired. A few weeks later, the day of Tully's formal hearing arrived. The makeshift courtroom was set up in a county administrative building. Rows of wooden chairs lined the room, filled with local officials, press reporters, activists, and curious onlookers. At the front sat a panel of legal experts and departmental representatives, prepared to review evidence and hear testimony regarding Tully's alleged misconduct. Tully sat stiffly at one table, his lawyer a grizzled man who specialized in defending police officers beside him. At the opposing table, Michaela sat with Carmen Lewis and Agent Song, who would provide federal oversight. The hearing would determine whether Tully would face departmental termination and potential criminal charges. One by one, witnesses were called. Officer Harris described Tully's unusual eagerness to arrest Michaela without cause. A data analyst presented statistics indicating Tully's disproportionate targeting of black drivers. A mother tearfully recounted an incident where Tully had demeaned her teenage son during a routine check. Finally, Michaela took the stand. She recounted the night in calm, precise language, detailing how Tully's words and actions escalated the situation from a simple stop to an unlawful detention. Throughout the testimonies, Tully grew visibly agitated. He mumbled under his breath, shook his head, and occasionally shot venomous glances at the panel. His lawyer attempted to cross-examine witnesses harshly, but the weight of evidence was clear. The hearing lasted well into the evening, culminating in closing remarks from both sides. When the panel reconvened the following day, the verdict was swift and decisive. Tully was found in violation of multiple departmental policies, including using excessive force, conducting an illegal search, and detaining a citizen without probable cause. The panel recommended immediate termination from the force. Additionally, a federal investigation into possible criminal civil rights violations would proceed. The gavel struck, punctuating the end of Tully's law enforcement career. Outside, a crowd of reporters swarmed. Michaela kept her statement brief. "This is not just about me," she said. "It's about ensuring all citizens are treated with dignity and respect by those sworn to serve and protect." In the parking lot, Tully found his car vandalized with graffiti that read racist. The tires were slashed, leaving him stranded under the curious gaze of onlookers. He stood there, fury coloring his face, as he realized the extent of his fall from grace. With no support from the department or the union, who wanted to distance themselves from the brewing federal case, he was on his own. His humiliation was complete, and for Michaela, it signaled a shift. The old guard who once protected officers like Tully could no longer do so with impunity. A new era with new standards was being forged in real time. Weeks after Tully's hearing, Michaela walked through the marble halls of the Department of Justice, the polished floors reflecting the grandeur of the building. She'd just wrapped up a meeting with the Attorney General and other senior officials about a sweeping policy initiative aimed at curbing racial profiling and abusive policing tactics. The Michaela Johnson Mandate, as some were calling it, sought to tighten federal oversight of local law enforcement agencies, increase funding for body cameras, and establish more robust channels for civilian complaints. She paused by a set of tall windows, gazing out at the bustling city streets of Washington, D.C. In her mind, she replayed the events of that fateful night, the flash of police lights, Tully's harsh commands, the cold grip of handcuffs. If she closed her eyes, she could still feel the dusty gravel under her shoes. Yet from that ordeal had come tangible progress. Tully's termination sent a powerful message. No one is above the law, not even those sworn to enforce it. Civil rights organizations seized the moment, launching new campaigns to educate citizens about their rights. Several other departments across the country announced internal reviews of their traffic stop procedures. Social media buzzed with discussions about bias, accountability, and the need for reforms. Of course, not everyone cheered these changes. Critics argued that the reforms tied the hands of good officers, or that Michaela's case was an outlier. But for every critic, there seemed to be an ally, someone with a story of their own, someone who understood that systemic racism wasn't an abstract concept, but a daily reality for many. Michaela's phone buzzed. She glanced down to see a text from Angela Price. "We just got word from the senator's office. He wants to schedule a press conference to support your policy bill." "Great job, boss." Michaela allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Change never came easily, she knew that better than most. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a surge of hope that real strides were being made. Her personal trauma had been transformed into a catalyst for overdue reforms, and she wasn't done yet. The world was watching, and she was determined to honor the trust placed in her. With renewed purpose, she stepped away from the window and continued down the hall. Each footstep echoed a promise to keep fighting until justice wasn't just a word on paper, but a lived reality for every individual in this nation. And so, what began as a late-night traffic stop turned into a national reckoning on accountability and justice. Officer Tully's career ended in disgrace, and his story became a cautionary tale for any officer tempted to misuse their power. Michaela's resilience and unwavering dedication to her principles sparked systemic changes, shedding light on the silent struggles of those who'd never had the platform to speak out. Her victory was not just a personal triumph, it was a beacon of hope for communities across the country, reminding everyone that standing up to injustice can truly make a difference. If this story moved you, please take a moment to support our channel, like this video, to show your solidarity with those fighting for justice. Share it so others can learn from Michaela's experience. And subscribe to stay connected with more powerful stories that inspire, empower, and pave the way for meaningful change. Together, we can make a difference.